What mount did we give away? The new $30 one. So let's talk about this leak. I think this is super fake, but it doesn't really matter because there's a topic here. So yeah, let's talk about it. Then we'll do a 14 post of some kind. So if you guys have a 14 post that is under, let's say, like 20 minutes from the last 2 weeks, let me know. Have the link, have the topic name ready, and I'll Google it because I don't typically click links. Let's do this. All right, so Brian sent me a leak, and for those of you that don't know, I typically, when I cover leaks, if I cover leaks, I don't cover all leaks. I first and foremost want to say, be very, very careful with leaks. When we talk about leaks, it's very easy to get emotional and get excited about what they mean, and as a result, when the event or possible change or whatever comes out, it is very easy for a leak to put you in a state where you were prepared to either be excited by something or hurt by something. And when something different happens, you don't have the real reaction ready. And so when something exciting happens and you already knew it was coming, the devs are like, oh, are you excited? And you're like, yeah, I already knew. And so that's kind of a bummer. And when you're super excited about something that they never said, and then they come out and they're like, hey, we're really excited about this change, or unfortunately, we've got to go through a little bit of a change here, you're super upset because you were like, oh, I thought it was going to be amazing. The most recent example that we've talked about is people being excited about a data mined mount in Final Fantasy XIV. And when that mount turned out to be a $30 store mount, being really frustrated because their expectations had been set around that. And that leak making it where people had the opportunity to be even more upset than they would have already been. I'm not saying that people like store mounts, but knowing for a fact, oh, it's coming into game, it's going to be tied to Triple Triad or this upcoming seasonal event, I know it, I'm getting it, can't wait, super pumped. You're taking a gap between reality and expectations. Your expectation possibly being never another store mount ever, and reality where you were never going to be in alignment, and you're spreading that gap. So you're just making the hurt that much deeper. And so I think just be really aware of that. And so here is a leak with all of that giant context that Blizzard Insight is being dissolved out of the current changes and everything going on with Blizzard into a new team that would be called Insight. That would, of course, be a bigger shift towards no longer Activision Blizzard kind of being the sisters companies and much more to being a subsidiary. Diablo is considered by far the most promising franchise right now, with Diablo 4, which just lost its leadership, having 3 planned expansions, and a remake of the original Diablo, Diablo 2 being in the works, coming out September 23rd. I believe it's entering like alpha or beta right now. I haven't been covering that much Blizzard news over the last 2 weeks. And then Diablo Immortal will receive a PC and console release. Remember, its mobile release was originally being handled by a company that does mobile games, mobile action RPGs, and could do it as kind of a reskin, just like when like Disney licenses out for like a Temple Run type game or whatever. So it could just be kind of a cash grab. But when the community put so much emphasis on it and they realized it was going to be such a representation of the franchise, especially not knowing how long it would be until Diablo 4 came out, my understanding is that Diablo Immortal has basically been taken away from that team to be brought in-house. And that way it could be more under their control to become more of the representation they're expecting it to become, and not just a mobile invitation to, if you think this IP is cool, why don't you play the real thing? An untitled Diablo PvP game will begin development. That seems like straight rumor. I haven't seen anything confirmed about that. And then the Diablo team, like the Hearthstone team, will be mostly unaffected by company shifts. Diablo was always kind of operated off in its, at a time, I think it was the run for like Blizzard North for like 10 years. Like it just has always kind of been its own island. Warcraft was its own island. As World of Warcraft had immense early on success, it enveloped many parts of the company. But the IPs were more separate back when I first got into Blizzard games. And so I don't really know that I'd worry too much about that. World of Warcraft entering official maintenance mode. I don't know that, so I would stay away from this word here. Official maintenance mode is something they would never ever announce, even if it were true. The little work that was already put in the expansion after Shadowlands will be released sometime in 2023. 9.3, despite the name, will have nothing to do with Shadowlands and would just be salvage stuff from 10.0. So this implies that we would never get a new expansion for World of Warcraft retail, that Shadowlands would be the poetic end. And the problem with that, in my opinion, is that they had to rush huge portions of Shadowlands to get it out the door, and so you end up with a ton of missed storytelling opportunities that have a chance for it to be that wrap up that, you know, End of Dragons is trying to be with Guild Wars 2, and that's why they delayed it with Endwalker and what that's going to mean narratively for Final Fantasy XIV. And so it puts them at a weird spot narratively, and then from a gameplay loop, it doesn't make it clear what you would do with the property after that, because Guild Wars is not done developing and Final Fantasy XIV is not done developing, and because they have pronounced that these ends will be the end of the narrative and not the game from the get-go, and they've talked about making large-scale, very transparent investments in what the future of the game would be as a peace offering to the players, saying the narrative needs to wrap up because it's getting long in the tooth, and then we will move into something new and different. I think they've won a lot of loyalty from their fans, and a lot of, we appreciate that you see that this has kind of run its course and that the game still has a lot of life left in it, if we take certain aspects of things like the narrative and we let them kind of naturally expire. And, you know, if Shadowlands wrapped all the way up, how do you handle something like a time skip if you guys are already not respected with time skips? How do you handle, you know, restarting? Like, they've already taken so many opportunities that, you know, at this point we've got space goats and robots, and it just gets so out of hand that, like, now we've gone to the land of the dead. So do we go from here to the land of the place where you die when you die? Like, it just gets so silly to let it keep going into, like, I've killed the gods, and then I killed the creators of the gods, and then I killed the guardians of the creators of the gods, and it just, like, you just extrapolated it to such a point that it's hard to believe the champion of Azeroth would ever die to a hog in the next expansion. And so it just gets really silly. So I don't know that they would ever put it into a maintenance mode like Final Fantasy XI, where there is still, like, updated seasonal events and in various, you know, there could still be PvP new seasons and updates, but that it would no longer have 2-year expansion cycles with patches in between. That's what this kind of implies. And then classic servers would be merged onto 1 or 2 with the launch of Wrath of the Lich King Classic and the last classic expansion planned. There is a question of here, do we move into like a RuneScape, or where do we go from there? Because for many players, Wrath of the Lich King was the last expansion they really truly loved, and everything after that has always been at the cost of something else that they liked. You know, I liked this about that expansion, but I didn't like this. And so every expansion after that might not get that same nostalgic kick, and people would just be playing it to play it. And so when you start to have accusations of large-scale botting, large-scale, you know, selling power and things like that that make it really hard to want to play, it's really hard to manage what classic servers could be unless they go back and relaunch vanilla as like a ladder type experience or something like that. A new untitled World of Warcraft successor MMORPGs in the works. We've heard this before. Looking to take a lot from Final Fantasy XIV. Of course, you would look to take anything from the industry. So Final Fantasy XIV is just a way of naming the second in line. So that's not a big deal. If World of Warcraft never existed, it would be like Final Fantasy looking to learn from Old Republic and Guild Wars 2. And like to simply name one, I think is really it's not as meaningful as that a lot of times these sentences say. This is going to be developed by a majority new team than those who made and worked on the last WoW. Of course, if there was a successor MMO going on at the same time as current development, you would have to make it a separate team. You can't have those resources taxed on both ends. Yoshi P has talked about what the cost was of doing 1.0 while developing 2.0 under, in some parts, the same team, and it was something that he felt that he promised them, this is just a sprint, it's just for the short time to salvage and save an MMO, not to launch off of a existing MMO that does have a player base. And 1.0 in many ways was in a worse state than current World of Warcraft by far, and so, you know, and then he promised that, and actually in many ways he kind of laughs when he talks about how bad he feels that it turned out that workload didn't really drop off like they expected. So that's not a shocking statement that if there is a successor being worked on, it would be in the secret recesses, in some deep dark basement at Blizzard where nobody knows about it. It would be a total reboot with new lore. That makes sense. The question is it IP? We talked about StarCraft Ghost. We've talked about Project Titan. I mean, we have seen these sort of things promised before. Different ways of interpreting fantasy. Is it still the Warcraft universe? How does that work? Currently, it's only in the planning stage. Yeah, when Mike was still in charge, Mike said that over half of all things that got through this stage got cut. So like the number of games planned at Blizzard that we never heard of. Yeah. And so it would focus on Eastern Kingdoms and Outland with playable races from both worlds. Is currently believed not to not have factions. It will not borrow from Hearthstone, which remains separate and continually updated new expansions. I don't think World of Warcraft's ever been designed to borrow from Hearthstone. Hearthstone is a fan service card game that goes the other way around. There is like a story being told, but it's a story being told in a very similar way from my perspective as like the story of Magic the Gathering, where you're setting more of a theme and letting the story tell itself, less narratively. It does have the opportunity, because it's a computer-based game, to allow you to like play against NPCs and stuff, so you have a little more control. But it's kind of like Overwatch, where like you wrote a lore, you built a game, and then you go, oh crap, I really wish I told a better story and a deeper story, and you're forced to kind of go back and reinvent ways to insert more canvas into the game. It's currently believed not to have factions is not a crazy statement, because Ian was quoted, I believe last year, unless I'm just totally insane, as having said that he didn't believe that he could say without a doubt that there would not ever be factions removed from World of Warcraft. That was not off the table. And so he wasn't saying factions were going away in World of Warcraft, but he was saying that, like, hey, if that's what would make the game better, they're not saying, let's just not do that. It's like, no, let's think about that. A Warcraft mobile MMORPG has been in the works since 2019. I think this is a different topic, separate from the PC. And so when you talk about WoW Classic, and you talk about Final Fantasy 11, and you talk about 1.0, and you talk about early 2.0, early WoW retail, things like that, a lot of these things were designed for PC specs that, are very quickly becoming overshadowed by these tiny little devices that I believe we all have. And so to say a mobile MMO, I think, conjures up this like very free-to-play, pay-to-win, ads popping up, oppressive, and it doesn't have to be that. I think Diablo Immortal is Blizzard's opportunity to prove that they're capable of not making it that. But we're moving into a genre where like Fortnite on a phone and Fortnite on a Switch and Fortnite on an Xbox look an awful lot alike. And so we're moving into a state where, especially as we back things with cloud-based hardware, that something running on a tablet with a controller or a full keyboard and mouse as a requirement, it would be really nice to be able to kind of do my gathering or check in on my retainers and things like that. And it doesn't mean that the game is any less than what it is. So if they are designing a successor and they are designing a mobile as a separate project, that seems like two different ways to skin the same cat. That seems like two different ways to evaluate the same idea and just see which one makes it out of the planning stage. But I would think that any future MMO needs to be aware that mobile is a platform that's here to stay, that cloud is a platform that's here to stay, and any mobile thing needs to be aware that unless you're just a cash grab, right, unless you're just, which Square Enix is guilty of, unless you're just a cash grab, you need to be really aware of like, okay, but how are you going to sustain something when Clash of Clans or Lords Mobile or whatever, when they age out, what happens next? And so how are you going to sustain what comes after this? Because a cash grab on its own isn't a strong foundation compared to something here. And so how are you going to launch that out of this brand as opposed to something coming out of more the King side of Activision, where this would be the sole goal, this never being a part of it? And so I think that's kind of something that this seems to me like two different teams working independent of each other. Let's see what they come to. Maybe they get merged. Maybe we draw from one and pull it into the other. And so, and being aware of it, yes, it does allow you to do things like with China, but like the gaming market in China, that's really shaky right now. And so just a planning stage is all many companies are going to be willing to admit. There's a ton of money in China, but that's assuming that the government doesn't get to the point where they view gaming and these distractions and crypto as these ways of subverting the culture that they're trying to establish, and so as a result, they're cracking down on a lot of that. So I would be really careful with that, and like it doesn't make sense to me why you wouldn't have King launching mobile MMORPGs. Why you would have these guys who aren't really known for good storytelling and aren't really known for mobile. If you're really wanting to do it, why would you not just go trust the already mobile branch you have? A Hearthstone spin-off game is happening is based off the auto battlers. Already seems silly because Hearthstone is like a flash-based spin-off game that happened inside Blizzard already. So it's already a spin-off game in its very nature. So I don't really know what that would look like. But I'm not saying that's not possible. And then Overwatch is believed to be unsalvageable. Overwatch 2 has been canceled, and as have multiple smaller mobile projects in the same universe. Overwatch in late 2022 received maps and heroes planned for Overwatch 2. Overwatch 2 was always going to just be Overwatch 2.0. Overwatch 2 was just a way of rebranding the fact that they want to now go back and make a more PvE-based element with other modes, with other heroes. The PvE mode was already something that was testable at BlizzCon 2 years ago. So to say that would literally be canceled instead of just released as like a light mode with very little updates sounds a little scary. And the fact that they would still launch like a Netflix original series out of a game that has struggled to establish the level of lore that they had hoped for it, I think that's like that seems a weird way to align with this. Why you would not also release Overwatch and just push Overwatch into competing, I don't know. And then StarCraft has been abandoned. Yes, the RTS genre in general is not in a great state, and they have not proven that they can take on the likes of League or anything like that. So that's not news. There's nothing here that's really leaky about this. StarCraft has already moved into like a free-to-play state. There's still an interest around that community. It's just not big enough to justify an all-new MMO or all-new RTS coming out. And then because of characters like Sylvanas, Tracer, and Kerrigan no longer capture the imaginations, there's been a lot of work on developing new IP. Well, that's honestly about time. After, if that's true, like they are long due for something new. Long due. And so after 3 canceled projects they've only been working on since 2020 set in a unique fantasy universe, it will debut a gacha-style RPG and announced at either Gamescom or E3, which honestly, this is where Diablo Immortal should have been announced. Gamescom or E3 is absolutely where it should have been announced. And then 2022 being canceled, I think it's going to just be a digital one like it was before. They can't do an in-person one. They had planned on doing an in-person follow-up to the last one. Planning provided it takes a long time to set up that convention center and secure vendors and all that, and you put down a lot of money and a lot of investment in that. From a company that has cut a lot of investment in the teams and stuff that make those sort of things possible. So I don't know that this is really tied to this. This is just another statement alongside it. So, like, saying that this is several weeks of YouTube speculation, this is not news. And this is not news. This is not news. This feels like they're reading a lot into what Heroes of the Storm happened. And, like, Overwatch is in a rough state. This does not feel like news. These feel like two things of the same speculation and are 5 and 10 year speculation, wild long-term speculation. This feels like speculation that's not crazy news. This feels like wild guessing. And then this is not news. So, like, I think this first comment and, it doesn't, it all feels like you've taken some basis in things that are truth adjacent, so they're not a huge risk to say, and then you're adding on to those some things that are really, really dangerous to like get legs under them, because even if those ideas are being entertained at Blizzard, I'm sure they have entertained all sorts of crazy things in the past that didn't come to be, whether they were things you did want or you didn't. So I would be very, very careful with leaks, just in general. So I don't know that, this is something that Brian sent to me, and I don't know that it's wildly leaky. It doesn't feel nearly as leaky as like the internal post on kind of how people were feeling and things like that. It doesn't feel nearly as sourced as that. It feels like a lot of big predictions, and so it's, it's very similar to like people that predict lore with Final Fantasy XIV, or people that speculate class design in an upcoming, update to Destiny or Guild Wars. It feels like there's very little penalty for being wrong on any of this, and it's loose enough that if anything even remotely close sounds true, that you can claim that this is right. So I don't know that I would get wildly excited about this. I do think it's good context to have that this is what at least people are feeling that they know. But like I don't think there's anything here. I don't think that they're done with World of Warcraft. It's got at least 10.0 in it. Just because there's too much money. There's just too much money. So it's a lot of really easy, low-hanging speculation here. I think the biggest thing here is the rebrand. I think the biggest thing that would be leaky is a rebrand. And when you look at the fact that every time something bad happens with Blizzard, Mike Morhaime gets a call from the press and says, "Hey, do you want to comment on this?" And so if they, some headline gets to say, "Hey, here's something that we feel that Blizzard hasn't gotten to comment on, and to help drive our narrative, we've contacted a guy who doesn't work there because his name used to be on the door." Like, I can understand wanting to distance yourself from that, especially as they're trying to move into a new era of Blizzard. They don't want to be associated with the people who have left and are now running or working at studios of their own. They don't want to be associated with people who have been pushed out for doing things that will damage the legacy of Blizzard. They do want to be associated with the massive leadership and cultural changes that they're pursuing. So saying they're going to change the name on the door is not insane. Saying that they're going to consider a rebrand of sorts. We're going to see new logos, possibly a new name. We're going to see possibly new IP. These are all things that actually I kind of hope are true, only from the standpoint of these are the sorts of things that underline a massive redirection. And it doesn't have to be a change in name on the door. Square Enix changed a lot when Yoshi P redesigned 2.0, and they almost went under during the 2.0 redesign. And then since then, building Division Unit 3 or whatever it's called, has had a massive impact on company culture. And Square Enix as a whole has changed drastically over the years. With the Montreal group being their own freestanding thing and Yoshi being his own freestanding thing, and we have seen massive redirections, and not all of them have been successful. They've taken on things like the Avengers project, which has really struggled in many ways, but they've also had massive successes in their new Switch team that had Octopath Traveler and is now working on Project Triangle Square, and we have seen massive success out of Final Fantasy XIV. We've seen all of these things. We've had big swinging attempts, such as the amount of investment they put in something like Final Fantasy 15, the amount of investment that they're likely putting into Final Fantasy 16. We've seen a lot come out of Square Enix, and it's changed a lot over a 5 or 10 year span. And so to say that leadership changes and management changes, like what has happened at Square Enix over the years, needs to happen at Blizzard, and that through the process it would not represent the company that it did before in good and bad ways, I think is fair. It doesn't require a name change to get there, but to say that, new IP and new stories and a new name and a new logo and new leadership is happening lines up with what we're asking for. So I don't think it's really outlandish. If it doesn't happen, that's not shocking. We're all begrudgingly aware of how little things we ask to change sometimes get changed in these companies, and we're all a little bit bitter when we see, somebody like Bobby Kotick come out and say with 154 million, yeah, everybody around me does need to change. Oh, nobody's safe but me. It's a little frustrating to be in those situations because you feel like the people who should change will never have to. But to hear that there might be a chance that this is changing is really positive news, in my opinion. I don't think this is really crazy. We've seen Square Enix did used to be Squaresoft. We used to have Blizzard. Diablo came out of Blizzard North, and so there was different kind of aspects, sides of Blizzard, and we've seen rebrands happen before. We've seen companies get absorbed before. We've seen studios change hands before. And honestly, we get upset when a name that was on the logo of the loading screen for our favorite game changes. But you got to remember, at this point, like, huge amounts of leadership have changed, either because they've been fired, laid off, left for other opportunities, or simply retired, because these people are human beings and they age. And so I don't think it's that big of a deal to say, hey, you know, after 25 years of this name being on the door, the company does not represent at all what it was 25 years ago, in good and bad ways. And because it's under different people going in a different direction with different technology and different IP, we think it's fair to call it something different. I don't think that's totally insane. But either way, the question is, will they make good games? Will they be able to retain and top talent and treat employees with enough respect that they stick around and they invest in games that make a positive impact on gaming? Or is this just going to be a rose by another name? Kinda.